Okay, so thanks everybody for coming. This is great. Well, not great we're having this meeting, but great we're having this meeting and training. So I'm gonna talk about the Goldspotted Oak Borer biology, and then Bea will go into management. So this is the Goldspotted Oak Borer, and entomologists are very literal when they have their names. So it has gold spots, it attacks oaks, and it's a borer. So that's how it got its name, Goldspotted Oak Borer. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And this insect is a wood borer. Its scientific name is Agralis aerugutatus, and it really attacks red oak species, and this attacks healthy live oaks and red oaks. And it was really found in Southeast Arizona in the early 1800s. There are different species in southern Mexico, but it was found in California in 2004 during an exotic wood borer survey. There were a bunch of trees dying in Southern California in the early 2000s. They weren't sure what was going on. And then Kim Corella with the Forest Service discovered that this insect was killing these trees, and then it was identified as the Goldspotted Oak Borer. And really since that discovery, and that was in 2008, it's killed approximately about 200,000 trees, probably more oak trees. There's not a hard number on that, but it's an estimation. But it's probably been in California since before 1996. So it's been here for a while. So this is the distribution of GSOB. So the species we have here is from Southeast Arizona, and there's a different species in Mexico and Baja and Guatemala. So this just shows the distribution of oaks in general, showing that the infestation in California really wasn't a range expansion. It was brought in from Southeast Arizona, infested firewood. So I just wanted to show that. And this is a distribution of GSOB that we currently have right now. The infested counties are San Diego, Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange, and LA. And then, unfortunately, Ventura, which is why we're here today. So when you, GSOB can cause a lot of mortality when it's established for a long period of time. This is a picture in San Diego County with mortality about 45%. You can see all the dead trees dying in there. And there's a high level infestation rate in here, about 90% on those large trees. And I'll get into this a little bit later. But when an area affects a new area or on the edges, you have a lower infestation rate. So it's good to manage infestations early when you find them. GSOB can really disrupt the ecosystem. They're keystone species. Everybody knows that wildlife, insects rely on these trees for habitat and food source. Native Americans, it's in their culture to use acorns, and they're part of their traditions. They have a lot of aesthetical value and property value as well. So they are really a big asset to the ecosystem and ecosystem services. So this slide just shows how that can change when GSOB affects in areas. There's a riparian area in San Diego County, and all these oaks are dying. This will affect obviously the ecosystem and the riparian area. And this is a campground, and you can see with the decreasing crown cover and the dying trees, it's really become a hazardous situation. So it can really affect the areas that it affects, that it attacks. So to go over the Goldspotted Oak Borer biology, we'll start with the adult. So the adult's down here. It's about an inch long, maybe 3/4 of an inch. And when they emerge from the tree, they'll create these D-shaped exit holes. You see how it's flat on the back and how it has a bigger belly, and how they sit right here. They'll just chew out and make this D-shaped exit holes. So you'll see these exit holes on the tree, and I'll show more of this later. But that's a good sign that your tree's infested with GSOB. So once these insects emerge, they fly to the canopy of the oak trees, usually the same tree or nearby trees. They don't fly very far, and they feed on those leaves. They need to feed for about 10 or so days. They become, they have their ovaries become mature, and then they mate, and the canopy are on the trunk of the tree, and they lay these eggs. They're really tiny. You're not going to see them in the field. They're like 1/4 of a millimeter in size, maybe even less. And they lay them either singly or in clusters, little clusters, and they lay them in the bark crevices or underneath the bark flakes, because when those larvae emerge, they're really tiny. They don't have enough energy resources to chew through a thick bark of coast live oak or California red oak to get to the foam area. So they lay them right in those growth cracks so they can just easily enter. And the adults can live for a few months. And so they can lay in their lifetime about 600 eggs in little clumps throughout the tree. So they can lay quite a few eggs. So when these larvae hatch, the insects bore into that phloem and they feed in that phloem cambium area. And they go through 4 stages where they get larger and larger and larger. And this is the mature larvae right here. It's about 1 inch long. And this is really what you see in the field a lot of times. I've never seen a GSOB adult. Maybe Bea has, but I haven't seen an adult in the field for all the time I've been working on this insect. But you mostly see this larvae. It feeds at the cambium interface here. So it's feeding all these black squiggly lines are where it's feeding, where it's been. So it chews on that bark, or in the phloem and the cambium area, and then it poops it out. So they're just like little feeding machines, and they just meander around in there. And the galleries are black just because of the reaction with the tannins and the volatiles. But this insect, with a lot of insects, it's really hard to tell what species you have by looking at the larvae. But with GSOB, you can tell at least it might be an aggressive species, because this insect has little pinchers at the end. So here's the feeding mouth parts and little pinchers at the end. So that's a good diagnostic way to see if you have a white grubby thing in their tree. If it's flat, has a big broad head, and it has these 2 little pinchers at the end, it's maybe cause for concerns you may have GSOB. So once it feeds in the phloem cambium area throughout the summer, it gets big enough, large enough, enough carbohydrate, enough reserves that it bores back out into the phloem, and then it makes this little pupal chamber. So here's the bark right here. So it bores out from this cambium interface out through that couple inch thick bark right to the edge, and then it folds over on itself. It's called a hairpin formation. And you'll see this a lot throughout the year, but mostly in the fall, early spring. And this where it turns into a pupa and a pupa, and then an adult. So over the winter, this transformation happens. It's really easy to find GSOB during those times of the year, because you can just flick back the bark and don't have to do too much destructive damage to the tree, and you can see these stages of the insect. And then, as I showed in the beginning, here's that pupal chamber, and then it will just chew enough hole through here and come out in the D-shaped exit hole. And the adults usually emerge, the peak emergence is late June, early July, and they can emerge from, depending on elevation, April to May, and then keep, and continue throughout the year until September, October or so. So here's just a graphic of that to make it a little easier. So the adults emerge in May, September. This is what was, Tom Coleman put this together when it was discovered in 2008. So there really wasn't a lot of history or biology on this insect, because it was native to Arizona and doesn't really cause much mortality in that state. So adults, eggs, and the larvae feed throughout the summer. And that pre-pupa, you can see a lot of those stages throughout most of the year. So it's a really good time to search for GSOB. If you have trees that may not look quite right and you want to just peel back the bark a little bit, you might see those stages. So here's that little larvae that hatches from the eggs. They're obviously not very big, don't have a lot of reserves, so that's why they're laid in those little bark crevices. This is the mature larvae, and here's one in a hairpin formation, and then it constricting and becoming an adult. And Bea will get into this management area. So these insects attack coast live oak. and California black oak are the ones that they prefer. And they can attack Kenyan live oak, but that's least desirable to them. And this map on the side here on the right shows the distribution of these 3 species throughout the West Coast. And it covers about 15 million hectares, so it's a lot of area this insect can be spread to. We found this insect at sea level or at high elevation. So really those temperatures don't affect them because they're protected underneath that bark, right? So if you have high temperatures, temperature underneath that bark can be about 10 degrees lower, or and vice versa, if you have cold temperatures, it can be warmer underneath that bark. So you're not going to get to those points that affect these insects enough to kill them. And I've alluded to that they like these larger trees, so they really like large diameter trees. So coast live oak about 18 inches, but really we've seen them attack in high density areas, anything 8 inches or greater. So this is a healthy tree. You can see how it is really green and full canopy. It really looks fine, but as GSOB attacks, it disrupts that cambium interface, which disrupts the water uptake and the tree's ability to take water and nutrients. And you start seeing trees that look like this, a thin canopy, off color, some tip dieback. If you see a tree looking like this, it's good to investigate, see what could be going on. And then as it further becomes infested, the canopy obviously dies back and the tree dies. It was red oak. It's pretty similar. You'll see some smaller leaves being produced, tip dieback, and then it takes a few years for GSOB to kill these trees because it invades the trunk area, and then it girdles that section of the tree. So you have repeated attacks that these trees can sustain. So it takes a few years for trees to die back. But when they do, they succumb pretty quickly, and you'll see this fall black oak in particular, it has fall color in June or July, just really off color. You can see live oak do this as well. So this is really a distinctive sign that or symptom that this tree is infested with something or something's going on with it. So it's good to check that out. And again, they like really large trees, but again, with black oaks, we've seen them attack trees about 8 inches in diameter. But really, they like the larger trees if they're around, especially in new sites. They have that thick phloem. They really like to feed in the area. It's a good nutrient source for them to feed. So other evidence of attack is this staining. So when the insect is feeding in that phloem cambium interface, it's disrupting that water uptake, as I mentioned, so that water accumulates in that feeding area, and then it has enough pressure and pushes through bark cracks. So you'll see the staining usually in the springtime. Well, that's a good indicator that something is wrong with the tree and may not necessarily be GSOB. A lot of other things cause these stainings to occur. But it's a good evidence if you see crown thinning, the staining, that something could be going on with your tree, and it's good to check it out. This is just showing large scaffold branches can be attacked. So there's a lot of GSOB exit holes and attacks we saw on these large branches. But really you see a lot of the attack mostly on the lower trunk. So about 8 to 10 feet from the ground level up is when you see a lot of the attack. But if you have these larger branches, it can attack those larger scaffolding branches in the oak trees. So this is, again, the galleries. There's meandering. You can see the liquid here, the fluid from just that accumulation of the water. This is a healthy cambium of the oak trees. This is a disease and all these galleries. And here's that GSOB larvae in the hairpin formation. And it will stay there until it becomes an adult and it chews its way out. So just showing what that impact is of those galleries. Here's some a really infested tree that was debarked. You can see all these black galleries and how it's just covering the entire tree. So that tree really didn't have any chance of uptaking any water or nutrients. Here's a cross section, and these black little sections here are the galleries. So just to reiterate, you can see how that cambium is really disrupted and the water can't be taken up. So the tree starts to die back over a period of years. Again, just showing that if you just cut back the bark, you can see those larvae in the hairpin formation or some pupa that aren't quite sclerotized yet to become adults. So it's a really good time in the fall or the early spring to look for these insects. And obviously the key symptom or sign you want to look for is those D-shaped exit holes. They're small, so you can't just walk by and see them, especially in low populations. You have to look at the trees because they're about the size of the writing on the quarter Liberty. So they're about the same size of those letters. They're about 3 millimeters in size. And they can be scattered around the tree, but they're usually, again, at that lower trunk of the tree, about 8 to 10 feet and below. And they're really D-shaped. So some of them, they can be tricky to diagnose, but they're really clear, they're really D-shaped, and they're that 3 millimeters in size. And as I mentioned, these insects don't really fly that far. They really like to stay where an easy food source is. And some of them even stay on the same tree, and there'll be these brood trees or amplifier trees, as they're called, where this houses a lot of the GSOB population. So they can contain 66 to 95% of the GSOB population in one tree. So all these toothpicks are exit holes from this tree. So these trees have been really well attacked. So this will be a good strategy for management, get this insect population lower down so you can manage this insect properly. And this accounts for about 7% of the trees. So you have a lot of trees that could be infected, but you have a few amplifier trees, and that's a good thing to hone in on. And those trees usually die back a lot more rapidly than you see other trees because they're heavily infested. So it's good to hone in on those trees for management and be able to cover that a little bit later. And just to show how many insects can be in the bark, because there's insects in the bark, right? It's not in the wood. They stay in the bark or not in the wood. So if you just grab some bark, and we did that here, we put it in the barrels to see how many GSOB larvae were removed. This is about like a 3 foot by 3 foot section on the amplifier tree. We put in there, and we got about 200 insects to remove from that small little bark area. So from an amplifier tree, you can get a lot of insects just from this little small section of bark. So that's really important. And also, this isn't really a good sign, but if you have woodpecker feeding these, because those insects are right below the bark, right, ready to emerge. Those woodpeckers, it's a good source of protein. They're like, this is a really good thing to eat. I'm hungry, so they flick off the bark and pick off those larvae and those pupa, and they eat them. So if you see woodpecker feeding, it's a good indicator that your trees are being attacked by some sort of insect or bark beetle. And if it's an oak, and it's one of those coast live oak or California black oak, and you see D-shaped exit holes and staining and crown thinning, it's a good indicator that it does have GSOB. But this is if you see woodpecker feeding, it's a good indicator to kind of look at that tree a little bit more because something's going on with that tree. I just wanted to show this because this just shows the different kinds of emergent holes that can be found on oak trees and how can they be misidentified or kind of confusing. This is GSOB, so it has a D-shaped exit hole, but there's other beetles that kind of make some similar. There's some other beetles that make D-shaped exit holes but are larger. But these are mostly secondary. They'll attack the dying sections of the wood or dead branches. You won't see these insects on the trunks of the tree unless the tree is already stressed. So you might see ambrosia beetles or other beetles after GSOB attacks, but they're not what's causing the tree to die back. So it's a good reference to have, seeing kind of what insect holes that you're looking at, because it can be confusing when you're out in the field and haven't really looked at it that long. As I mentioned, spread is really slow, so they don't fly that far. They might fly a mile, maybe, but usually just fly to the next tree. They're pretty lazy. They don't really want to go any further than they have to look for food. So they'll just fly to the next tree or stay on a long tree. So really those long distance spreads that we're seeing is by movement of infested firewood. So that's a really source of a big concern for this insect. Again, just showing the distribution. So this is where it was found in 2008, but probably been here since early 1990s. And then it jumped to Riverside, San Bernardino, Orange County, LA, and then now Ventura. So yeah, don't move firewood. It's a really big precaution. But so I want to get into some new infestations that we found. We found a new infestation in Santa Clarita and earlier this year that we actually found from iNaturalist. We're looking on there and saw the GSOB adult itself on a tree that someone took. So we checked that out, and sure enough, trees were infested with GSOB. Obviously in Ventura County, we found Matt from MRCA was driving by, and he's the one that's been working on this new infestation in Santa Clarita County. Saw a dead oak tree, and just that's what he's honing in on right now. And he's like, I gotta check it out. And I'm really glad he did, because he found D-shaped exit holes and it was infested with GSOB. And we found some other infestations in Riverside, new locations, and in San Bernardino County with different cooperators that we're working with. They're out there looking and refining these new locations. So the more you look, the more you find, right? So, but it's good that we're finding these, because we can manage these infestations properly and hopefully minimize the spread further. So this is that tree in Box Canyon that we found on beginning of August. This is the coast live oak. See how it's dead. All the other trees look healthy around it. So it's really easy to pick out. And we found larvae, or the exit holes were just characteristic of GSOB. We have these cards that we can give to you guys for during trainings that have the D-shaped exit hole carved in here. This is exactly the same size as the GSOB. So you can put it up against there and see if it's the right size. And then I tapped into the bark and found larvae in the hairpin formation. So we found this one tree in Box Canyon, and then Ventura County Ag has been trapping as well, just to get a handle on this, to see where they can, they do find GSOB, and they did have a trap catch in Upper Ventura County. Can't remember the name of this area, but it's on a fire road. So it's in the area. So we're just trying to, so now we're gonna figure out exactly where the distribution is and start tackling this project. But interesting, I just want to show this map. This is a risk map that was done by Vinet 2015. The heavy red areas are the areas where GSOB is most likely to occur based on their risk assessment. A risk assessment obviously is not perfect, but it's been pretty accurate. So this is San Diego, obviously, Riverside, San Bernardino, where these infestations have happened, Orange County, and this is in Santa Clarita and Ventura. So you can see the yellow really wasn't projected to be that risky for this insect. Didn't have the right temperature or moisture, the variables they put in to have GSOB occur, but obviously that's not the case. And as you just go further north, you can see that there's a lot of potential for this insect to spread in many areas throughout the coast and the Sierras, that sort of thing. And this was in 2015. So climate has obviously changed in the past 10 years. Things are getting warmer, drier. So that will obviously change this model. But I just wanted to show that this really has could have a big impact throughout California with these areas that are that have a high probability of being infested by GSOB. And just to show this too, what Jolene's seeing in the field just over those 10 years, this was produced by Tom Coleman when GSOB was originally identified in 2008. I showed this earlier, the windows of kind of when you can find the different life stages. But Jolene's seeing it later now. He's seeing these different changes. So you're seeing the adults emerging to November, and the larvae later, and the prepupa can be found all year long. So this could be because of climate change, or we're just learning more about the life cycle, but it's really important that things are changing and the dynamics are not going to stay the same. So we kind of have to adjust our management strategies to that as well. And then we have a lot of resources for GSOB. There's obviously gsob.org, where you can report suspect GSOB if you find this insect. I try to keep this map up to date as much as possible with any new locations. So yeah, so we just try to report them, try to figure where this insect is, and then do some management. And then that's all I have. So I'm not sure what time it is, but we can go on to Bea.
Kim, we do have one question in the chat if you
Oh,
want to address it.
sure.
Somebody's asking, are black galleries from GSOB a distinction from other gallery forming insects?
You won't, yeah, because you won't have the GSOB, yeah, because those larvae are black. The galleries are black, but they're just black because of the reaction with the oak and the insect frass and that sort of thing. And the trees are alive, right? When they're attacking them, other insects that will attack the tree will be declining and won't have that enough resources to kind of try to it won't have enough fluid or that kind of thing to react with those galleries. So you probably won't see that. So it could be a good identifier with GSOB for sure. That's the only insect that you're going to see attacking that is can be an interface of live healthy trees. If you see if you see a dead tree and you peel off the bark or that area, you're going to see other galleries. But yeah, those black ones are a good identifier of GSOB for sure, especially in that cambium interface.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, I'll take over with the managing part of this workshop. One thing with regarding to the galleries is that a lot of bark beetles, they have very distinctive shape of the galleries. They look very pretty sometimes. You have like a central gallery and galleries coming onto the side. In the case of GSOB, the pattern is that there's no pattern. It looks like a plate of spaghetti all like tangled up. So, the fact that there's no pattern is also an indication that it could be GSOB. All right, so going into management and what we've been learning. So, when you already know that you have GSOB, you have to start figuring out some kind of management plan. And that management plan needs to have all of these components. They have to have a prevention component, detection and monitoring. You have to remove the amplifier trees that Kim was talking about. You need to know how to manage the infested wood to prevent the spread. And then you could have some protection, usually chemical protection of high value oaks. But in all of these components, you have two aspects of it. You have the pest management aspect and you have the communication aspect. And both of them are very, very important, especially when the actions are coming from the Ag Commissioner's office or from the agencies that are involved. You need to let the public be part of it, get them involved, because that's when you're going to have more success. Because you can remove all the trees you want, but if people keep bringing firewood in, you're gonna keep having reinfestation. Plus, probably you all know the moment you start removing or treating or something, there's always going to be people asking or being like, why are you removing these trees? What's going on? And just being able to communicate with the public and get them on board is really, really important. So when we talk about prevention, as Kim said, the movement of firewood is how these beetles move long distances and arrive to new locations. And even if you already have GSOB, you can have reinfestation of an area by people bringing firewood in. Or you can be a source of infestation by people bringing the firewood from your location to a new area. So really having awareness among the public. We have lots of campaigns about not buy it where you burn it and not moving firewood, but being vigilant about this is important. So a dead tree because of GSOB is kind of a recipe for disaster. You have an oak tree, which is really good firewood, and it's dead, and the person just has to chop that tree down, and now they have to get rid of all that wood, and they maybe can make a buck by selling it for cheap, or maybe they're nice and they give it to their neighbors. So really having that public awareness campaign is really helpful helpful to, prevent the spread of this pest. In the next step, once you started working with it, is talking about detection and monitoring. How is this infestation progressing? Where are your areas that are infested? Which areas are not infested? So finding infestations early is super, super important. A lot of things you can do to that is get as many eyes on the ground as possible. So you can start involving as many stakeholders as you can. So it's great to have the county officials here and the contractors, beyond the ones that are doing this particular work, you're going to be looking at trees, every day on your work. And just having contractors trained on how to identify GSOB will allow you to, find those random trees that are in whatever neighborhood, because they had, they're already aware of that. It's kind of like how this tree that Kim was talking about was found. Matt was in that mindset, like, oh, oaks that are dying, and he's driving from work or it's doing something else, and he sees that tree and he stops and checks. So really having people trained is super important. Having land managers and even homeowners, they can be worried about their trees, and it's good to have them on board and looking and keeping an eye on their trees. So this training is the first step, is the first start of this, but getting more trainings to the contractors in the areas, in getting more awareness in within the general public, is something that as county ag commissioner would be I think you benefit from having that kind of work. So let's say you found GSOB, or you think you found GSOB. Now, what do you do? And this is what I'm gonna tell you is more like, okay, let's say you're new to it and you don't know. And as Kim said, it takes a little bit to sort of get the eye for it. There's a lot of insects that make other holes that look similar, especially with the bark that is like rugose and might look like a D shape. So it honestly takes a few, is this GSOB kind of ways to check until you finally oh, I know exactly what GSOB looks like. So especially at the beginning, but there's no shame to do it all the time. You can always document the evidence and ask for second opinions. So make sure you take pictures of entry holes and use something for the scale. So this is not a great picture. Like it's a picture of an entry hole and it has a finger, but everyone's finger is a different size. There's a lot of variation. I'm not really sure how big that nail is. So this is not great. This is a much better option with something like a coin. And this is the best, right? You have actually a ruler next to it. And in this case is one of our GSOB little identification cards. And I'm assuming probably when you get the in-person training, we're gonna bring some for you. And for the people in the county, if you need more, we can always make another printing. Just let us know and we can provide this kind of materials to allow people to better identify and better record what they're finding. So take pictures of the entry holes with something for scale. Take pictures of the tree. If you're not sure what species of tree it is, you can take pictures of the leaves, just so we can corroborate the species. Close up of the holes, close up of other signs. If you see the staining, if you see the woodpecker evidence, feeding evidence, you take pictures of that as well. And if you find a beetle, adults or larvae or pupae, adults, yeah, I've never seen one in the wild either, but larvae and pupae I did. You can collect it and preserve it in a vial with ethanol, and then we can just take a look at it. Larvae are usually way harder to identify to species, but as Kim said, we can even check if they have the 2 pinchers in the back, and that's a good sign. So, and then you need to collect the site information, right? Host tree, species, DBH, crown health, how many exit holes, the location, the date. So all those things we need so we can report that suspected infestation and you can get confirmation. And you report it in our website. So we're gonna show you this until you're tired of it. But really, gsob.org is a great source where you can go and just like go there and browse it, and you'll find a lot more things. But in there, there's a report a suspect GSOB. So you can always upload your information in there, and we can go take a look. If we look at the pictures and we think it could be GSOB, we can go and take a look. Now, let's say you know it's GSOB. You're already trained, you're in an area you already is infested, you need a monitoring plan, right? So you need to survey all the trees and keep record of what's going on. So for each tree you're going to be inspecting, these are the things that usually you need to collect. You need something about the tree location so we can go back and find it and do any kind of management, the species, the DBH, of course, the crown health rating, I'm going to show you in a second. The number of exit holes, because that will tell us where in the spectrum of management that tree falls. And then you can record if there's any bark staining or other kind of manage. So for crown rating, we usually use this 1 through 5, 1 through 5 scale. So from something that is fully healthy to something that has, between 10, 25 leaf loss, 25 to 50% leaf loss, pretty bad, like more than 50% leaf loss, and then you have number 5 is dead. So some scale like this is a good way for us also to know, for us or you when you're managing, to know what is the situation with this tree. Is this tree a goner? Is this tree something that if deemed something advisable, we could treat or not? Like if a tree has more than 50% leaf loss, it's already a tree that is not a good candidate for treatment because it's not in good health. So that information is very good to collect. And then the bark staining, as Kim was mentioning, you can just see a few of them. You could have 6 to 10 or more than 10. And then in this case, in the case all to the right, that's when the tree already is kind of on the other side of this. The bark is kind of peeling and cracking and coming off. That tree is basically, that part of the tree at least is basically dead. So then very important to put that into some kind of map so you can have an idea of what are you going to be dealing with. This is 2 examples of different kinds of maps where we're showing the level of infestation of the trees that we found. We actually considered, depending on the number of exit holes, between less than 10 is a lightly infested tree. Between 10 and 25 is moderately infested, and once it has more than 25 exit holes, it's already considered a heavily infested and is going into what we call an amplifier tree or a brood tree. And this is for what we consider here in Orange County, but it kind of depends on your management goals, right? If your goal is try to contain this as best as you can, or are you trying to eradicate it, or what, if possible. Sometimes it is not, if it's not something super isolated, but it kind of depends, because for example in San Diego, in the La Jolla campgrounds, they are considering something more than 10, they just remove those trees. So I'm a little bit more hopeful for that tree, and I like to wait until they have 25 or more to decide that tree needs to be removed. But that's something that as a land manager has to sort of make that triage decision, right? And in this other map, it's another example where we have trees that were target for removal or for being treated with an insecticide, or they were dead, but maybe not infested and dead. So with that, you're gonna start making your management decisions. So the brood trees or amplifier trees or heavily infested trees, all those are somewhere interchangeable terms. So this is more than 25, sometimes more than 30 GSOB exit holes. I used to just consider 30. Now I'm saying that 25 might be a good cut. And these trees are about 7% of the infested trees, right? But they can contain between 60 and 90% of the GSOB population. And I think this, I'm just sorry, I'm repeating what Kim said, but because we agree. But it's that tree. So if you remove that tree, you're removing between 60 and 90% of the population in an area. So that's one very good way of removing the beetle pressure in that area, and like slow that spread and slow that infestation. Even if you cannot treat the other trees, you're preventing those other trees from getting constantly reattacked and reinfested from these brood trees that are a big source of beetles. So removal of these trees is one of the main management recommendations. And in our experience, once a tree has more than 25 exit holes and it starts showing dieback, they don't come back. It's not a good tree for treating. It's not a good candidate for treating, and that tree eventually is going to die anyways. And while you wait for that tree to fully die, it keeps popping up beetles. So you might as well remove it earlier and get less beetles in the area. So once you remove that tree, remember that the bark of those trees that are amplifiers still have tons of beetles and larvae and pupae. In this case, there's some pre-pupae. No, this one is a pupae, and this one in the bottom is a pre-pupae, the hairpin configuration that Kim was showing us. So the bark of those amplifier trees that we're removing still has beetles. So we have to do something with that wood. So some options that we can do, if the client wants to keep the wood, we need to season the wood for 2 years. But that's not enough if we want to prevent those beetles that come from that wood to infest other trees. We need to season them in a contained way. So in the past, we were saying you can cover it with plastic tarp and keep it like that. So in this case, what you want to do is, just basically you're not solarizing it. You're just like holding this wood in something closed, so the beetles that emerge cannot leave and they die of starvation. I am not recommending that because this is very hard to make a really, really good seal in the tarp. It's 2 years. In 2 years, anything can happen to the tarp. You can have a dog jumps on it and scratches it. Big pine cones can fall and scratch it. It can be blown away. It's really, really hard to make sure that during 2 years that tarp is very, very well sealed. Some people were trying also to put this screens in the tarp so it doesn't get moldy, because that also happens many times, and then the wood gets moldy and it's not really good for making firewood. But that doesn't work either. Using a plastic mesh does not work either, because GSOB has really, really sharp mandibles, like it chews through the bark of an oak, and so it can easily chew through some plastic wire, or plastic mesh, I mean. And so it has to be a metal mesh, very fine mesh. So you can enclose it in like a bag of metal mesh, very, very well closed, and leave it like that for 2 years. And after 2 years, it is safe to move that wood and use it as firewood. But it has to be very, very well sealed. These are Houdinis of the insect world. They will find that hole, that little crack, and they'll just escape through that. So be very, very careful on that. So this works, but it's a lot of work. So what other options do we have? If we want to keep the wood, we can debark the wood. So, the GSOB only lives in the bark up to the cambium. So if we get rid of the bark and we manage the bark, the rest of the wood can be used as firewood. There's different ways to do that. You can add a debarking, like, where is it? No, it's here, like a debarking sort of tool to your chainsaw. You can use a wood splitter to get the bark out, or a chainsaw, but it is very labor intensive. So it's something that it can be done. It is an option if your client wants to pay a lot for a lot of the time that takes to do this and keep the wood. Once you debark it, that debarked wood is good to be sold, to be moved, that's fine, but it has to be very well debarked. Now, what do you do with that bark? Remember, that bark has all the GSOB. So you have to either you throw it through a chipper, for example, so you just chip it very small, so those GSOB die. But if you're not considering keeping the wood for firewood, you can just directly grind the whole logs. As long as you have chips that are 3 inches or smaller, those chips are safe to move around and they do not contain GSOB. So options for that is you can use a tub grinder in the case of bigger logs, or you can use just a regular chipper if the logs are smaller than that. Smaller than 18 inches or so, you can use a regular chipper. And then those chips, you can use them as mulch in that area. If it's an open space, you can spread them as long as you keep them, you keep that layer of mulch less than 3 to 5 inches. It should be fine. Don't leave, of course, amount of wood chips, because that's a fire hazard, or like fuel load, increasing the fuel load. But if you spread them pretty thin, that works too. So this is another example of the kind of chippers they use in the Angeles National Forest. So, but let's say we have now high value oaks that we need to protect. There's some things that they need to match before we can say this is a good candidate for chemical management. So we will only consider them for chemical management if we have GSOB confirmed within 5 miles of that oak. That way, if we don't know that there's GSOB in the area, there's no point on doing any preventative treatment to that tree. But if we know that GSOB is close by, we have a tree that is very important, very high value, they could receive GSOB treatment. Of course, make sure it's one of the susceptible species and it's more than 8 inches in diameter. As Kim was saying, GSOB likes bigger trees, usually more than 18 inches tends to be what's preferred. But and we haven't seen GSOB attacking anything smaller than 8 inches. So if the tree is smaller than 8 inches, I would do nothing to it. And then for it to be a good candidate for chemical management, you need a tree with a healthy crown and less than 25 exit holes. So if it has more than 25 exit holes, that tree is considered amplifier and it should be removed. But even if it's infested and has less than 25, you could treat it. Again, treatment is something reserved for high value trees. It's kind of hard to, go around and treat a whole forest, but it's a good option for trees that are, in house property or like in the streets, and there's some trees that are really high value, want to keep them. There's been cases where like big sort of groves of oaks have been treated, and has been done for a while. It's just you have to think about if it would be sustainable or not, because the treatments have to happen pretty often. So let me tell you about the options and how often each of those options need to happen. So you could treat the trees with contact insecticides. In that case, both carbaryl or bifenthrin work well. If you're going to use bifenthrin, I recommend adding a conjuvant like Nufilm P or something like that, that keeps the chemical in the bark for longer and protects it a little bit from the UV lights, so it gets like to penetrate a little bit into the bark, so it doesn't degrade so quickly. For carbaryl, as if the people in this group, if you have any experience, you know that it's a little bit more risky for human health, and there is only so much spraying of carbaryl that you can do as an applicator in a year. So because of that, I tend to prefer using bifenthrin just to not be so harsh on the applicator's health. But both of them, you have to be very careful when you apply them. You should spray only the main trunk and the big branches. Anything that is bigger than 8 inches diameter, the small branches and the canopy, you do not spray that. And it's a less expensive option, so you can treat bigger amount of trees, bigger areas. But again, be careful because if there's any drift, it can land on other trees or other areas, and it's a contact insecticide, so it's actually any insect that gets in touch with it will be affected. And it's something that you cannot use if your tree is next to water, because both carbaryl and bifenthrin are very detrimental to aquatic life. So we want that, we don't want these chemicals to end up in the water. Another option is the systemic insecticides. Oh, and for contact insecticides, you will have to do this application every year. For contact insecticides, you can do that every 2 to 3 years. So it's less often that you should do a systemic insecticide. And we can use emamectin benzoate or imidacloprid. Both work or give some kind of protection. And it's more localized. You can use it close to water because it won't drift into the water, but it is more expensive, and you have those injection wounds that they can get infested with something else, like some bud canker, like in the case of this picture. These are all injection wounds and they're not healing very well. So it's always it's always a balance. You have to figure out the pros and the cons, like should I treat, should I not treat, is the tree infested, is it not infested? So applying a systemic insecticide every 2 years to your tree, is that worth it? Is the tree really at risk or not? Because you could get that tree infested with something else on those injection holes. If you're treating with an insecticide, a systemic insecticide, I recommend that you use Bacillus subtilis, which is a biological fungicide. So you can use Bacillus subtilis and spray directly into these injection sites, just sort of to give it a little bit of a protection against spores from bud canker just landing on it. So I actually, when we do trunk injections, we have a spray bottle with Bacillus subtilis, and we just spray in the injection hole and then a little bit around it. Right after, so you do the application when you take the tea. You spray it with the Bacillus subtilis. In this case, we would like to apply this in the spring, right? You want to do it at the beginning of the right before the emergent season. So this is the graph that Kim was showing us about when the adults are coming out, when the eggs and larvae and pure pupa are around in the pupa. So we want to do the contact application right at the beginning of the emergent season, right? So they start emerging in March, the peak is in June and July in the summer, and then they sort of slow down. As Kim was saying, it seems like maybe this is getting this emergent season is getting a little bit longer, but also it seems like this emergent season might be getting a little bit starting a little bit early in the areas here by the coast. So in here I had the contact application recommendation was May, but I actually say that if you are in the coastal area, consider treating earlier, like not coast, lower elevations, I mean, sorry. In the lower elevation areas, I will consider applying the contact insecticide like in March or April, because this emerging season is moved a little bit. I don't know if it's moved or just starts a little bit earlier, and it might just continue a little bit later. Which is not great. So if you are applying systemic insecticides, you also want to do it sometime between February and April. So those insecticides are applied in the spring when the tree is moving water and nutrients, and it will uptake that pesticide, and it will be already in the tree when the larvae start feeding, and ideally will kill that larvae, and maybe even just kill some of the adults when they start chewing out to emerge. For surveys, I recommend generally doing surveys after the emergence season. So considering this emergent season that we can see here, we will be surveying from October through April. If you want to be more conservative, you can survey from like November through February. And this is mostly if you're going to be surveying an area over and over, you want to make sure the survey happens after the emergence of all the adults. So you don't miss a tree, right? Like if you're surveying, let's say in June, and you're planning your treatments, you're going to be surveying in June and you're going to miss a lot of the emergence. And so there's going to be some trees that are infested and you won't notice that they're infested because you surveyed too early. And that is if you are, kind of like following an area over and over. But for just looking for trees that could be infested with GSOB, just for the first time, I'll say you can just do that at any time. Like anytime you're working out there, you're looking at oaks, and if you see it, if it's July and there's a dead oak or a declining oak, I would just go and see if there has D-shaped exit holes. I think that's still good. And I put this, so if you're going to be transporting infested wood from where you are to a management facility, I don't know if it makes it, if someone wants to write down when would you think it would be safest to transport infested wood, considering this emergency season. I'm gonna check the chat, see if someone. And if you're feeling a little bit shy, ideally you will move the infested wood. If you need to move it, if you cannot ship it on place, time it to do it when the beetles are not actively emerging. So it's safest to move wood just to be chipped somewhere else. You're not gonna be moving wood to being used as a firewood, right? But to be managed or chipped somewhere else between October or like between November and March, I'll say. All right, so to finish us up, again, I'm going to insist with gsob.org. Please go there, check on what's there. It's a big information hub. It has information from everything that we've been working on. It has so many handouts that you can use if you're talking to the public. It has the reporting tool. It also, you can subscribe for updates over here and get emails when anything is happening regarding GSOB. And, you know, just browse it, look it, because there's a lot of information there. There's a story map that you can use. There's this information I'm showing you and more on like management of infested wood, on management of infested trees, and you know, tips and other stuff. So please go and check this. And yeah, so thank you all. This is all the people that have something to do with what I presented today. And the last thing I'm gonna ask everyone is if you could fill out this survey that is here in the QR code. I'm gonna grab this and hopefully I can put this same link in the chat. We ask everyone who takes any training from us, we really need to collect this kind of information about how much you know, some feedback from you, so we can report it as part of our job. So we really, really appreciate it if you could go ahead and take 2 minutes to fill out this survey. It's very, very quick. And with that, I think we are ready to take questions.
Thank you, Kim and Bea. For all of you, we invite you to put your questions in the Q&A section. There is one question in the chat, and the person wants to know, when an infested tree has been found, what's an appropriate survey distance from that point?
As bigger as you can will be the right answer.
As much of an area as you have the capacity to survey.
I say so, yes.
Yeah, could you just survey like 100 feet or 300 feet around that tree and you don't find anything, like, oh, I'm free and clear, but you could have a tree 500 feet. And so it's good to try to survey as long as you can.
One question now, I'm gonna say, feel free to unmute your mics and if you want to ask a question live as well. But the chat has a question about how often should an area be resurveyed, and it's once a year. So the cycle of the life cycle of the beetle takes a year. So, you know, as long as you survey once a year, you're not going to find much difference in between. So once a year, sometime between November and March is ideal.
Can you talk a little about the 3 insecticides that can be used and by whom? Are they all restricted use insecticides that require a certified applicator or a permit?
Thanks, Julie. Yes, definitely all three. So bifenthrin, encarbaril, and imamectin and imidacloprid, they all need to be applied by someone with a state license, so like a QAC or a QAL. So it's not something that we will ask or tell a homeowner to treat themselves. If someone decides that a tree deems treatment, it has to be done by a professional for so many reasons, but among them, only someone that's properly trained will make sure that the application is done correctly, so it's effective, and so it doesn't have any or minimizes unintended consequences, other non-target organisms or anything else. So has to be done by someone with license, and so it's trained. But one thing I wanted to tell, since I have here the people from the Ag Commissioner's office, in the case of other counties like Orange County, we have like a work group on emerging tree pests that used to be called the GSOB work group, because it started because of GSOB. And now is a place where all the different agencies and municipalities, we meet every other month and we share information and questions about like what's going on with different emerging tree pests. And it's a really good way to have connection between the different stakeholders. And when you have to take action, you already know who works on, flood control and can grant you access to that tree that needs to be either observed or removed or whatever. For like an example, right? You're not just trying to figure out who in this other agency can help me. You already know them. You've been seeing them for a while. And Ventura County already has a group like that. That started with invasive shellhopper. I'm really hoping that group is still going. I used to be there at the beginning of it when we started it, like 4 years ago, I want to say, or 5. And I'm hoping that group is still somewhat going. And if it's not, I encourage you to revive it. And so that will be the shellhopper group that is now going to be used for GSOB. So because it will be the same people that are interested. So I really encourage you to maintain or revive that group and use it to discuss how the county is going to be approaching this from all different municipalities. And be aware that municipalities might not be too interested in participating until they have an infested tree. And that's, a little bit sad, but it's life. But at least you're going to have a place where they can come once they have an interest. And so, hopefully you'll have some proactive people that even when they're not infested, they still want to go and participate. But I see a question too from Cherokee. Says, we're going to be doing surveying now while we have fundings. Is there any other suggestions for team surveys?
I'll jump in here. So basically our existing funding runs out in March. So we are going to be doing surveying now. We do the one tree, we are removing that tomorrow that you guys identified in Box Canyon. And just curious while we're here on the group, right? My environmental team's here as well. And we're going to be doing surveying of a mass amount of area with Cal State Northridge and drones included in that effort. We go to the following training on October 22nd in Newhall. So I'm just curious if you guys have any other feedback about surveying now while we have the means, right? That if we don't have it next year, even if this collaboration is amazing, thank you all for being here. It's awesome to be here. So I'm just curious about the surveying that we're going to be doing now.
I think that if you can cover as much as you can cover this year, you have to do as much as you can with what you have.
Yeah.
I would, it's so start asking around. Try to get as much information from others, like just get other agencies involved. I know, for example, SoCal Edison, for example, just got trained with GSOB, and their crews are, now looking for it when they're doing their rounds and looking at the trees and trimming. So, getting other people involved. And right now you still have the funding. And if someone else says, hey, I think there's GSOB in here, then you can go and check and then start looking in those areas. So that would be my recommendation, is that just as soon as possible, try to get as many people on board as you can.
Yeah, we do. Thank you so much. Yeah, we do have a really good team. We're developing our maps and key areas of interest right now. Andy Johnson's on the line, so I don't know if Andy, sorry to put you on the
Yeah.
spot. I don't
Yeah,
know if
no
you have any
problem.
questions.
I was gonna just kind of double up on the same question too. So we do have the one location that it's been found in Box Canyon, and our initial intent was to build radius on that location and do our best to get in touch with all the landowners, and we've got the APNs mapped and everything, and just make sure that we can try to get to all of the adjacent properties, of course, but then from there we were looking to start with a standard distance, and right now we've just pinpointed 1,500 feet. So with a 3,000 foot radius, that's about 165 acres. And it's always going to be tricky because of landowner agreements and that, but it would in the offing, would you assume that would be enough, or overkill, or what? We just want to be efficient with the time and funding that's available.
You might want to target areas like county, I don't know if there's parks in the area, things like that might be a good target area as well.
Okay.
Instead of just going out in the forest, maybe where people could bring in firewood and that sort of thing might be easier to hit.
Mhm.
But
Well, assuming that the location is roadside,
yeah.
and yeah, I mean, we can certainly pare that down a little bit. It doesn't need to be that full radial distance from the point, but we were also going to include roadside assessment for X amount of distance from that point in both directions. I think it's pretty much just the one main road through there.
Mhm.
But again, just looking from an initial survey perspective, what in your point of view would be the most efficient?
So one thing that we do, especially since, as I understand, your funding it's not going to last too long, and so you're short on time. One thing we do sometimes is we do some kind of tier survey. So like the first pass is just drive through and look for, those suspect oaks. You're not from that oak that you're removing right now, I'll say, yeah, like a few blocks around, I would just try to look as many oaks as I can. But then once you're out of there, just like drive around and look for oaks that are showing signs of decline, dead oaks, declining oaks, like those. Just you're looking for amplifier trees, right? You're looking for those that are really bad, because those you can spot from a distance, and then go check. They might be dead for whatever other reasons. There's so many reasons why oaks can decline, but then at least you look, if there's an area that has a lot of infested trees, you will find the amplifiers. You will probably miss some trees that might be infested in the middle, but at least you'll get those amplifiers, and that will be, in my opinion at least, the priority, right? You have to tackle those amplifier trees before they can spit out more beetles, and that will be the first step. So maybe do that, just like go on just looking for the suspect trees, either driving around or doing like walks that are without getting in the total woods, right? Just something from the distance, and just look for those trees.
Thank
All right, that sounds good. Thank you.
I'd like to add to what Kim and Bea just said. Make sure that you look into cryptic areas like ravines or canyons that may be on the side of the roads that maybe in other words, keep your vision up and down too, look down as well as up. I would also suggest, because when the Box Canyon tree infestation in Ventura County was detected a few weeks ago, or a couple of months ago now, Los Angeles County Fire, their forestry division, because it's so close to the county border, it's my understanding they sent out a large crew near the border, the county border, of their people to try to detect any in LA County. So since you have limited resources and time, you might want to reach out to them and see which areas they recently surveyed. So you could have a larger area in another direction, maybe more into the county, or maybe areas they couldn't get to and near the border.
Thank you, Julie. And yes, we are working. We're sponsored by LA County, CAL FIRE, through LA County Fire and Ventura County Fire. Celine is here, and Andy Johnson is our environmental consultant. And so right now we're going to be looking at the main right-of-way area in Box Canyon. We're going to be looking at the fire roads, and we will probably end up where the one was caught in the trap. And we will also be in the Northeast Simi foothills and Bell Canyon as well. And then West Chatsworth overall. It's funny because we have had our eye on this tree for a while, and we've treated almost 50 oaks right in that adjacent area. We've worked about a mile on the fire road directly above it. And it's our goal now that we've wound down with the brush clearance to help identify as many oaks as we can. And we also have a new area that we added to our scope last week, which is in Westlake. And it's a oaks community, essentially. There is probably a few hundred mobile homes, prefabricated homes that have hundreds of oak trees that have had less than any attention in probably the past decade. So we're happy for that.
Nice.
Thank you guys, really great training. I love the reference to the plate of spaghetti and the Houdini of the insect world. It was really sweet. Thank you guys so much. It's a really good time.
Thank you.
Yeah, I also want to thank everybody. Sorry, say it again. I also wanted to thank everybody too for the training and to kind of give an update on the Ventura County front. So we have a press release that we've been working with Kim and Julie. So I appreciate the both of you on the help with that. We have a press release for GSOB that we're going to work through getting with our public information officer's office. So that will be sent out to the public along with us putting it on our website and our social media platforms. And obviously with our trapping, Cherokee and Andy definitely will keep you all updated with what we find in our traps, because I think that'll really give you a great understanding of where GSOB might be occurring, and that might be able to harness your survey efforts a little bit better. Obviously, Kim and Julie, along with Celine, we have a bit of a working group. So Bea kind of wanted to touch back to that ISHB discussion. John Bill, who was the Deputy Agricultural Commissioner at the time for the program, was running that. But I recently got promoted into that role, so I'm kind of heading on those efforts. So it seems at this point, ISHB has kind of moved a little bit into GSOB. So that's kind of where we're at right now. But we are communicating with people who are selling firewood to make sure that, you know, they can educate their clients or their customers to keep the firewood where it's being burned, and just spreading the word. So we're doing a lot of outreach and education, and we're also taking calls. So as the calls come in, definitely we'll keep the group updated. Most likely we'll be working very closely with you two as well, Cherokee, to give you some of those locations where the trees have been identified, and then we can, you know, kind of start working out on that stuff. And yeah, we're doing the best we can with limited funding. We've definitely obviously reached out to our board of supervisors, and they are very concerned about the issue as well. So just working through to see how we take some next steps.
Thank you. I mean, that sounds like really great efforts. That's really good.
Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody here.
If I might say one thing about I know I heard that you were saying you were trapping,
Mhm.
and I did not include any trapping in the detection, and that's as we are working at least in detection, we have steered away from trapping lately. We really don't find it too effective. The trap doesn't have any lure or any pheromone or nothing that really attracts the beetles to the trap. So it's kind of like the beetle is flying, thinks it's a tree or something, and just like slaps to it. But it's not something that is, is in my opinion, it's 10 times more effective to look for those declining trees than use the effort on traps.
And I totally agree.
My program, we don't trap anymore. We used to. We didn't find it useful, and we stopped doing it.
No, I totally understand. The purpose for us to do that is to give in an effort to help with GSOB. Currently, we don't have the funding to work through surveying sources. So that's something we're looking into. But at least with the traps, it's something that we're getting out there to be proactive. We did find one positive GSOB on a trap, so it could have been my luck. But we were using the emerald ash lure, and unfortunately it showed up. I mean, it's a good thing that we're able to detect it, but bad thing that it showed up. So we still have the traps out there. I don't mind, and neither does our commissioner mind putting a best effort into moving in that direction to assist, although we can't do any survey. So, once we find an opportunity to do survey, I think that's what our next steps would be if we could do that. But I agree with you. I totally agree that surveying would be a much better option at this point.
Or even like using the same. So I know that maybe the trapper will be setting up maybe other traps for other programs, and it's just one more trap that they survey, that they service, sorry. But just that same time, if it's not like that, the time that that person is using and going and replacing the trap and checking that trap, they could just be driving through the fire roads and in the areas and looking for those, trees that look suspicious.
Yeah, of course. And I think another thing too we can offer is we have a lot of inspectors in our department, and I could talk to my commissioner. And obviously, as we're doing our work out in the field, we're looking at the environment, trees, all these other kinds of things. So as we're out and about doing work, if we identify something like a canopy that's dying or some kind of dieback on the tree, that's something that I can get in touch with the group. Kim, I could definitely get you involved to put the science together to figure that out, and then we can connect with Cherokee and then, figure out the next step. So I think it's just about communication and building this up.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you're just picking up on the Shaho Borer group. I think that will really help a lot. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot, but we'll figure it out.
And can I just say really quick, so we're working on these maps for key areas of interest that we will share with you guys, and then we can collaborate on that effort and our joint efforts and the scheduling. We're going to be working with Julie and Andy Johnson, and Helix is another, so Rincon Consultants and Helix. And then we have weights and measures. So, and ag, we're really looking forward to, dividing divide and conquer, right? Because it is a massive scope. And then we work with Cal State Northridge on some of the drone efforts. So they've been doing some existing drone work looking for GSOB for JPL NASA. Who's familiar with that? Anybody here? Yeah, Julie. Okay. Yeah, Danielle, right? Danielle Graham, CGST. So they are going to share those results with us soon, because some of the deeper terrain, for instance, Bell Canyon, parts of Box Canyon, it's hard to be accessible, right? That's why we're focusing primarily off the roadside. So thank you guys.
That's wise too. Like we do some surveys here in Homestead Parks, and sometimes we can find that tree at the bottom of that ravine, but what can you do with it?
Right? You're only gonna know
We
it's
need a
there.
helicopter to take it out, and it's just not something we cannot do. Eventually we're like, okay, we're gonna be focusing our surveys in the areas where we can do stuff.
Yeah, that's why we're focused primarily off the roadside. So we will keep you guys up to date. I have to go, but thank you guys so much for the wonderful training today and everybody who's here.
Thank you guys, and feel free
I'll
to
see you
reach out to
tomorrow.
us if you have any follow-up questions.
Yes. see you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Welcome.
you.
Thank you,
all for
everybody.
joining.
Thank you.